Hinson Hasty. I am Senior Director of Theological Education Funds Development at the Presbyterian Foundation. This is a ministry of the Committee on Theological Education, of which Katharine has a seat as a member, and it's an honor to be here with her today. The Reverend Dr. President Katharine Rhodes Henderson. She has troubled the waters and healed the world. That was your inauguration motto. That's Auburn's part of Auburn's mission.
Tagline.
Thank you for who you are, and thanks for being here today. I'm so excited. I can't even stand it. I've been looking forward to this. Tell us where you are.
Well, let's see. Where on the planet am I? I'm here in New Paltz, New York, which is about an hour and a half north of New York City, in this 1860s farmhouse, which is the home of our heart that we've had for about 30 or so years, 30 some years. And we've been here on and off a lot during the COVID pandemic. So it's been a joy to be here with Chuck, my husband, also a Presbyterian minister, and our 13-year-old Springer Spaniel, Maisie, short for Amazing Grace.
Yeah, I forgot that she was a Springer Spaniel. We have a Cavalier. My Spaniel just in and out. Maybe back. Spaniels.
You may hear some barking.
Right, exactly. It's all fine. Well, that's beautiful, and I love your library area that you're in there. It sounds like you go up there and read, maybe.
I think a lot of reading happens on screen now, but yes, they're important books that remind me who I am and where I've come from.
Beautiful. Well, we want to hear all about that. I'll say just a little bit that I know. So, Katharine literally grew up in the shadow of a Hebrew scholar, her father, and next door to was it a rabbi or a Jewish family here in Louisville?
Jewish couple, two Jewish couples. Uh-huh.
And I know y'all were like family with each other, and has been on the road to justice from the civil rights movement with her father, right into the climate change movement that's happening now, and the interfaith dialogue. There's so many things. One of my favorite it's not a little program, a significant program, is the face-to-face, faith-to-faith, where you brought people from, particularly younger folks from troubled parts of the world, and trained them, brought them together, taught them how to dialogue with one another, and that's what you do. Katharine brings people together, and I'm just so grateful. I don't know if you learned that in your PhD program at Columbia or at Union Theological Seminary in New York, or in your home, probably all these different places that helped shape and form you. And your undergraduate education was from
the College of Worcester in Ohio.
The College of Worcester, of course. Worcester, right, exactly. It's a great school in Ohio, a Presbyterian related school.
That's right.
Not too terribly far away. I want to ask you, as I ask my guests at the beginning of each show, and my dog is interested too, what is the work your soul must have? What is your call?
Yeah. I think that I would say I'm in transition around the work that my soul must have. And that's a Katie Cannon question, right? The Reverend Doctor, is that right? Katie Cannon, who was my preaching tutor at Union Seminary in New York in 1982. Well, no, 1979, when I started seminary. So Katie and I go a long way back. And then my office at Auburn in New York City, I have a big poster of Katie Cannon on my wall. And so she continues to be somebody who is an important guide for me. She helped me outline my first sermon.
Wow, that's amazing.
Wrestling at Peniel. So anyway, It's a very good question. So, as I transition from the leadership of the presidency of Auburn, I'm trying to exactly listen for the promptings of the Spirit in terms of the work my soul must have, because the shape and form of my ministry will change, but my ministry has always come to me, and often unbidden. And so I'm not really too anxious about the form that it's going to take. And I got a call. I was on vacation in August and got a call from Jim Forbes, the Reverend Dr. James Forbes, and who's a dear friend, who was actually my preaching professor when Katie was the tutor in that class.
Wait, just time out just a second. So you had Katie Cannon and Jim Forbes.
Yes.
That's amazing.
It was
I mean, two of the
yes,
maybe
fabulous
best preachers of the last 100 years.
Absolutely. And anyway, Jim said, when I was sort of telling him, I'm not sure exactly, I'll be exploring many things. He goes, well, Katharine, why can't God just keep a secret a little moment longer? And so,
oh, that's beautiful.
That eased my soul about needing to know at this moment the contours, because I don't need to know the contours. I think the corollary to that question, what's the work your soul must have, is what is the work that the world needs to be doing? What is the urgent work in the world to which we are called, or to which I'm called? And so it turns back, on where the gifts need to go, where the superpowers, where the particular gifts need to go, in terms of what the world really needs. And so those are I'm living in all of those questions.
It's a great word today. Everybody, I feel like there's a lot of transition going on for everybody, even if they're staying in a primary call,
right?
How they live that out. And that's great to take notice of what's happening around you. I've heard that from a couple of guests actually in different ways. I like the way you say it is look for that urgent need.
Yes.
There's where your call, there may be a call there to respond. And I heard you mention superpower. Do you have a superpower that I didn't know about?
Well, it's I think we all have superpowers, and that sort of comes to us naturally at Auburn because we have this group of senior fellows who are some of the prophets of our time, like the Reverend Dr. William Barber or Rabbi Sharon Brous in LA, and Sister Simone Campbell, and others, Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III. And so Otis in particular is all about superheroes and superpowers, and giving people names of superheroes. And so it's not a kind of hubristic sense of superpower. It's a humorous, but based in reality too. So yes, we all have superpowers, and it's important to know what your superpowers are. I think one of mine, and it's related to gifts, the gifts of the Spirit, the gifts that you've been given. One of mine is to see patterns and connections that may not be so apparent to others. And that often happens in how this person should be connected to this person. And I think as Auburn has become more and more national and less regional or New York City focused, we're really a national institution now. It's connecting the people and groups of people and communities all across the country who are working to build this multifaith movement for justice, who are working on issues of justice, who may not use the word but are in some ways progressive, and so that's the world, and creating the world where we all belong. And so one of my superpowers is figuring out, who's in that network and who needs to be called in, and connected to whom and for what purpose. So that's one of my superpowers, and that's
Well,
one of
and
the things, that I will be thinking about. It's like,
right.
where did the gifts go that you've been using? And so that's what I'm thinking about right now.
And I think about Auburn hasn't always had a group of senior fellows, but
Right.
certainly those are, you're essentially amplifying those kind of voices and empowering them. I mean, the work that William Barber has done and Otis Moss and others, Valerie
Core.
Kaur, is she, I mean, just
Yes.
amazing. I mean, that, was it a Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve
New Year's
sermon?
Eve.
Wow. I mean, resurrection may not be about what's in the tomb, but what's in the womb or something like that.
Maybe it's not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness
Right.
of the womb, and we are waiting to see what's being born. What's
So I think maybe you're in the womb, Catherine,
oh,
and I can't wait to see what gets born.
a rebirth. Well, we yes. Hopefully, we're all in the process of rebirth,
You,
over and over again.
right, right. I mean, there's been a lot of light, for sure, but it's exciting to think about. And that's a wonderful superpower. I think about myself as somebody who's a connector
Yes.
in some ways like that, and it's helpful. And these are tools people can use in their discernment. I think a lot of folks are like, what is it that I have to offer
Yes.
in this moment, and what is it the world needs? So those are super helpful, and your consistent work for justice. And with courage, the ethical spectacles, I've heard you call them, that Auburn has helped create through social media or live events. Um, and that seems also consistent with the 200 plus year history of Auburn
Right.
Seminary, from Auburn, New York with Tiffany windows,
Hmm.
to New York City now in
Right.
what was the God Box Riverside Drive, where you're not traditional ATS accredited school. You're helping really develop leaders and empower them and give them tools. You're doing media training. You're helping them with social media tools now. I mean, you've really taken that long-term sort of progressive, I'll say it, progressive mission. I mean,
Right.
Auburn was new school, not old school, right?
Auburn
Back
was
in
a theologically new school, and when Auburn turned 200 several years ago, we were founded, in 1818. So, um, in the kind of intersection, Seneca Falls, the place of the birth of the women's movement, the abolitionist movement around slavery. So all of those things. But I think, as with other institutions, we in this moment have to tell a truer history, and so there are all of the um, contradictions that we live with in all institutions, but certainly old ones. I mean, Auburn Seminary was founded on land stolen from Iroquois peoples. That's true of Auburn, New York. And that needs to be told. Our foundation of the seminary building originally was dug by local prisoners from the neighboring prison, who labored, of course, without pay. Um, I early in my presidency and before that at Auburn, talked about. I picked up the language from the history books, that Auburn Seminary was found. It was a wild and godless region at the beginning. I said those words without irony, and of course, that's the way the history books. But that was not true. There were people there. There was ritual. There was all sorts of life before Auburn, New York, and all of that. On the positive side, we trained women and people of color early on. Harriet Tubman ended up living down the road with her parents.
Wow.
There was one of the faculty homes on Auburn Seminary's campus was a site on the Underground Railroad. So, these contradictory forces, both theological and cultural and practical, have always been at play. And so, I think for all of us, this telling a true history is really important before you can imagine a more just future.
Well, I had to say, your faith and moral courage is clear when you tell stories like that, and the history that you've done there that are not in all the history books, Katharine. I'm grateful. It reminds me of your inauguration coming. I remember how different it was, where we kind of traveled around town, and one of the places we went for a forum, I can't exactly remember the topic, but I'm not sure it mattered. We were at Bloomberg.
Yes,
And I had never been in the building. We did a tour. Bloomberg News the mission was really around transparency in the financial markets,
that's
and so
right.
they literally. I remember walking through, and they have all glass or plexiglass, even into the president's office. You can see everything. Transparency. I feel like that's been true of you. That's true of you as a person, of Auburn Seminary. There's a transparency. There's nothing hidden. No hidden agenda here. But we need each other. We're not in this alone.
Yes.
That feels like that's important for when you show up for justice, and for what God is calling toward is to be authentic and transparent, and you've got to do some work getting underneath the boards, which I think you've been doing at your house, actually, right?
I think, yeah, I think before I go to the house story, but transparency, I think we're all practicing. We're not getting it perfect. Certainly not not Auburn. I think that relationship is really important to us, and prioritizing relationship over transaction. And so that would be, and trying to be a trusted partner, who shares, and doesn't always claim too much. That would be our aspiration. So the transparency, yes, I've been thinking a lot about on the theme, what lies beneath, and what needs to be uncovered. So it's practical and theological. The practical is that we undertook a major, this was sort of a house that we came to periodically before the pandemic, but we had a particular squirrel issue in the kitchen walls. And so we undertook we decided, why not add complexity to the pandemic and just do a major kitchen renovation. And so a kitchen and mudroom and a deck. So yes, as the demolition began, Jeff the builder let out a big scream because the squirrel that was living behind the wall, and there were more than one, but jumped out at him literally that morning as they began the demolition.
Watch out when you start doing this work. Things may jump out at you. That's important.
Right. And there's a lot of stone here in upstate New York, which is very snakes are very fond of this area as well. So stone. So we've had some interesting experiences with snakes who like to use stone in the house for molting purposes. So anyway, but we have a beautiful, as the story goes now, we have a beautiful kitchen. And you asked earlier, I think before we began, where the making connections happen. How did I learn to make connections?
Right.
I would actually say it was at my parents' dining room table in Louisville, Kentucky, where, so it's related to the kitchen. That's where I'm going. The importance of bringing people, often it was missionaries. We had particular friends who were in Tehran in Iran as missionaries, but bringing that group of people together, bringing our Jewish neighbors to the table, sharing food, students certainly at Louisville Seminary, and so that's a lot of where I learned what it means to bring people together across lines of difference.
Yeah, Letty Russell, I can't remember which book it was, Household of Freedom or Round Table, is it round, what is, Partnership in the Round? What was the book? But she talks about kitchen table ethics.
Yes.
When you said that, it made me think like this is where and
Yes.
I've heard Katie Cannon also, the Reverend Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon. I heard her talk about how much with her mother and in their home
Hmm.
happened at the kitchen table, and in our own experience, how important that is.
Right.
It's a sacred place.
It's a sacred, yes, it certainly can be a sacred place, and that is, that's a lot of what is, and the ancestors are present at the table as well. Not just the communion table, but our tables, as we pull to get together.
Right.
The theological piece, getting back to the what lies beneath. I think a lot about our colleague at Auburn, Adrienne Marie Brown, who is an author and activist and wrote this amazing book, Emergent Strategy, about the life of movements, and a smaller book, We Will Not Cancel Us, which I think is a very important book to read. But she says, things are not getting worse, they're being uncovered. We must hold each other tight as we continue to pull back the veil. And I think that, that resonates a lot for me with this uncovering that we actually did in our kitchen. You don't know what lies beneath until you start the demolition. And I think that is a lot of what this pandemic time, the time of multiple pandemics that we've been in, around racial justice, around climate change and the environment, and around this brilliant virus that has destroyed so much. But a lot is being revealed, and we have to figure out how to hold each other tight as we continue this uncovering, because as was true with our kitchen is also true in our culture. Once you start uncovering things, you cannot go back. There is no what some people imagined was normal. And so, I think it's a time of, some have called it a time of great turning or an axial age, when the contours of the future are very inchoate and unclear. So it's a time full of possibility and also precarity.
Well,
Yes.
I hope we'll lean in on the possibility,
Uh-huh.
but I realize it's precarious as well. I mean, it's a tipping point kind of movement. But you made me hopeful. I don't know why you made me think about Genesis, about chaos to order. I mean, God is present in chaos.
Bro- uh,
Chaos.
God
I
is
mean,
brooding over the deep and the chaos.
right. I mean, and also, you're so keen on the prophets of old, but also the prophets of now, you
Right.
know, who are usually showing up to say something because it's getting a little chaotic, for one reason or another, to
Yeah.
help us, turn us toward or flip
Yes.
us around or, toward
We need
where
that.
God is calling us.
Yes, and we need that. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yes. And and it's important. I mean, some people are suffering so much greater than others. This is
Right.
this is the suffering is disproportionate. It's been an equalizer in some ways, but when you talk about economic inequality, when you talk about racial um, inequality, there is disproportionate suffering. and has been true for a very long time. So
Well, and speaking
some
of
of us
places,
have been awake and attuned
right.
longer than others, but I think
But
the
I mean,
yeah,
I think we're uncovering there too around, we didn't get it done in the civil rights movement, racial. I mean,
no,
it's not like racism went away. I mean, there are more layers that needed to be peeled. I mean, here in Louisville, clearly, but around with Breonna Taylor and others. I mean,
yes,
but it sounds like too a place to show up is to listen to those find and listen to those prophetic voices, and they may be in your neighborhood or in your city, or they may not be. They may not be people
that's right.
right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think that trying to listen for the who are you not listening to? Whose voices are you missing? Um, looking at the voices on the margins and those that are unheard. So prophets are not the prophetic voice is not necessarily in the people in the pulpits or at the front of a room or whatever. It's the voices on the ground. And
So during this pandemic, I have a 15-year-old daughter, I think and we're trying to find shows that we can all watch together. And early on, I hope you've watched it. It's called A Chef's Life. Do you know this?
no,
This is Katharine,
okay,
you're gonna love me.
all right, good.
No, it's on PBS. It's on, all the streaming, everything, but originally PBS. So Kinston, you know where that is in eastern North Carolina. You have family from Pender County.
Okay,
I know. So Kinston, was very much a tobacco town. It is now a foodie town because of Vivian Howard, who, by the way, I didn't even think about this, came to New York
oh,
and met her husband, who I
okay,
think is from the city, and they did some things in New York. Then they went back and started a restaurant now too. I think there's a few now in North Carolina. And she says she's done a cookbook, everything, discovering the South one ingredient at a time.
yeah,
And it was great because there'd be an issue on strawberries or then Brussels sprouts. And then my daughter's like, Brussels sprouts? I've never had Brussels sprouts. She makes now the great Brussels sprouts, because she was willing to go out of her, where I'm going is she was willing to go out of her comfort zone,
yeah,
and try something new. And it's back at our kitchen table there. I mean, where it actually, it has happened. And, but, there's practices like that, I feel like, where people are willing to take some risk, where you can learn. You don't have to jump right out into the protest line if you're not ready. Just start practicing getting uncomfortable or practicing listening to somebody you haven't listened
sure.
to.
Well, I think, I
Right?
mean, there's obviously a canon of new reading that everybody needs to be doing. So, and I'm sure you could put out, we could put
There should
out
be, I mean, there's a
a reading
syllabus, right? A
syllabus.
syllabus. I would say go to the Auburn Seminary,
Well,
auburnseminary.org
yeah,
website.
yes, that's fine, and we could develop a reading list.
Well, maybe that should be a project. That could be, your next most faithful step there, Katharine
Could
Rhodes
be, well,
Henderson.
it could be absolutely, and because I think there is just a lot of work to do. And then my mother, who in her 90s, who died about 5 years ago. I mean, she was and she grew up obviously in the racially segregated South. I mean, that was a rough part of the world near Wilmington.
Mhm.
And even in her 90s, she couldn't figure out why we weren't out marching in the streets.
Wow.
So marching has a place, um,
Amen.
and there are many ways of protesting, and there are many
Right.
ways of doing work locally. So I don't discount. People need to be on a continuum of learning, but also not just reading and learning and talking, but acting. So
Right.
voting is an action, giving money is an action,
Right.
organizing is an action,
Sure.
and we
Who,
need
the
to be
merchants you buy from. right,
and
is an
about
action.
economic, yes,
Hmm.
economic, yes. I mean, we do have ways of contributing and acting, and we have an untapped potential. We have this network of congregations.
Right.
We have this multi-faith network, as I started with talking about across the country, of like-minded people that we can connect with, who are trying to build this world where all belong.
Amen. Well, I wore my dove tie for you. It's the dove with the olive branch because I know y'all need to look it up if you haven't seen the ark on the truck bed during the climate change march at Auburn, recommended with animal crackers. You know, I think you're the dove of peace
Uh,
that's got promise for the future, and I'm just so grateful for you. You spending your time on today's show is a real gift, and I'm honored by that. I know you're a fellow sailor, so I pray that the winds will continue
thank
to be
you.
strong, and the wind of the Spirit is clearly
Yeah.
strong. And you know how to sail. She's a great sailor, friends. She knows how to sail. And
Yes.
maybe you can set us sailing, all of us, and send us and charge us in a moment. Catherine, let me invite folks to come back in 2 weeks.
So
Okay.
great.
Just before you do that, just in 2 weeks we have Mihi Kim Court and Andy Court. They're co-pastors in Annapolis, Maryland. They transitioned during the pandemic as pastors. We'll be talking about that. So we'll stay on the transition theme. And then October 8th, we're going to have a little fun. Another show, if you haven't seen it, Catherine, Ted Lasso. We'll be
Oh,
doing the gospel according to Ted Lasso, and that is with the pastor
good.
of Myers Park Presbyterian, Joe Clifford, is going to be with us. But please send us.
Okay, great. So I'm going to end this with a wonderful poem by Rumi, Muslim poet, and this is called The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.
Amen. Thank you,
Oh,
Catherine.
yeah, it's great to be with you, Lee, and with
Yes,
any of our listeners and our fellow travelers, our sister travelers on the journey.
it's good we're not alone.
You're not
Peace,
alone.
everyone.
Bye.